Two. It wasn't aggressive ringing there. That's true. So we go back to our original order of the agenda now, and that sees the Kiwi Rail update, and to that effect, we welcome along the Kiwi Rail team, which is Dave and John Knight. So Dave, without any further ado, I hand it over to you, and we look forward to your update.
Thanks very much, Chair. My update's going to be very brief. It just reports on our update since the last 2 months. Next to me is John Knight, who's our General Manager Networks. He's going to talk in particular about the power incident, because I know there'll be some questions about that. So best to front these things, so that's what we'll do. So as I say, only 2 items, how are we travelling and that thing itself. What I've got up there is in the middle column is the March position, is what I said at that time, and asking the question, well, has anything changed? Basically, I'm more certain about the first 2, so called as a yes plus. Drury and Parata, I'm still at likely, but I'm slightly lower confidence around Drury Central. Drury West unchanged, Western Traction Power unchanged. The Rail Centre, very confident now that that is going to be well and truly in place prior to that happening, and the rail network rebuild. So overall, in the last 2 months, I've got more confident than less confident about being complete, which is always a good place to be. And if I go to what still are the challenges, really haven't changed. The 4th substation, in the earlier I said may not be online. I now know it will not be online in time. That's okay. There's no impact to City Rail Link, no impact to opening electric services Papakura to Pukekohe, and more significantly, we are circling around on a power solution that really works for Counties Energy, actually works for Transpower, and will work for us. And the other one is, I guess we'll hear in the budget today, if Henderson Station is funded, that will have implications on the timing for any rail network review works on the basis that we'll want to do the works at the same time and through there. In terms of our long-term thinking, again, nothing changing, no change to priorities or the main issues. Clearly there's a lot of discussion going on between Mayor and Ministers about that, and it's not up for me to talk about that. But I've added a brown, black or brown, not quite sure what colour that is, to bottom left. But the other thing that's really circling around there, and I raised it at the last meeting, is actually setting the right funding levels for the continuous programs. And by the continuous programs, talking about the operations, the maintenance and renewals. And that's very much part of that ATAP discussion. So very little to report, other than I'm more confident than I was 2 months ago. It's not a bad place to be. So John, I'll hand over to you. You just need to press that chat there.
Thanks, Chair. Thanks, Dave. What I'd like to do now is give a quick optic around the infrastructure faults that were occurred on the 12th of May with respect to the OLE and the arcing incident. So this was a critical event, and one of our key pillars within Kiwi Rail is safety of our people. And the call that was made was the right call in terms of even though it did cause inconvenience and disruption to customer, it was the right call, because you cannot play with 25,000 volts that can kill people. And when there's an issue like that, and people's safety is paramount, I just want to reinforce that as a theme, because that is a pillar of how we operate. With respect to a deeper dive, this will give you an overview of what the contaminants that can affect discharge of and cleanliness issues with the contamination build-up and moisture on insulators as part of the OLE. And that gives you a quick overview. I won't bother going through the bullets. But another particularly key point here is that our codes of compliance are aligned to international best practice and are derived from UK, from Network Rail, and they move tens of millions of commuters a day on a metro system. So our codes are in alignment, and they've been benchmarked against Sydney, Melbourne, and also Perth metros on a recent visit we conducted jointly with the support from AT last October, of which a report was forwarded on the findings of those of that visit. So the findings of the incident itself, it was not a fault. It was a discharge phenomenon which is specific to high voltage power in support of rail network. The instance of the close inspection actually resulted in the fact that it could have been dealt with at end of service, but there was no way of knowing at the time, and in the highlighted text at the bottom it just reinforces the safety decision that was made. In terms of a catch-all around fronting the performance impact through weather events on the network, this gives a snapshot of historic site issues with respect to the January-February 23 weather events. There are two significant areas that we are monitoring and remediating at the moment, and that is the Newmarket Tunnel portal with respect to its status and stability. So we've put in sensors and 3D tunnelling scanning to mitigate and manage that risk. And we have a forward works program that will remediate that site over blocks of line that are programmed over the next King's birthday and into the following blocks of line so we can get the quantum of work delivered. The other sites that we're also addressing are the 20-kilometre slip on the Western Line, which was a hangover from October and then last year, and it's been a significant has had significant design engineering to complete that, and then we've had to look at pockets of blocks of line to do the remediation work so we minimise disruption so we can allow the timetable to run best as able with our partners AT and Auckland 1. The other three are containable. The last bullets on Sturgis Road, Newmarket Branch, those and the causeway damages are all being remediated, and the causeway in particular is being done through our rail network rebuild stage 2 works on the Eastern Line. In terms of our current performance, I'll very quickly go through these. Some of these are actually some good news stories. The phase 1 segment of the rail network rebuild, which was the NAL South Line, was completed over 12 weeks from December last year through to the 23rd of March this year, which resulted in a complete refurbishment of that network, addressing formation and drainage, and it was handed back on time to AT, and there were no TSRs or disruptions on that network on handback. The network speed restrictions across the network, as at today, we've reduced from June, where we had 8.5 kilometres. When I talk kilometres, I haven't got the drill down in time lapse, but in terms of we've halved the number of restrictions across the network in the last 6 months based on the back of the R&R rebuild and the proactive maintenance programs we're managing in the network. And the EM80 track evaluation car completed Auckland to code on the 15th of May, and there was no disruption or breaches of code. In terms of a quick update, in terms of a dashboard to give you confidence and assurance that Kiwi Rail is managing the second phase of the rail network rebuild, this is a breakdown dashboard performance indicator of the NIMT East closure. We're tracking at 31% completion. That work started on the 26th of March and it will end in December block of line this year, and then we'll transition into the third segment of the rail network rebuild. That's really a quick high-level fly past, Chair, and open for questions.
Okay, so thanks very much, and we do have a couple of questions for you. First, in the name of Councillor Simpson.
Thanks, Chair, and look, thanks, Kiwi Rail. Look, I've got a few questions, so I'll try and race through them quite quickly. The first one is about the timing of your rebuild relative to the opening of a CRL. So are you saying that it's a yes or a likely to be done in time for the CRL opening?
The likely relates to a potential decision to do Newmarket Branch after CRL opening. simply because there's reduced volume on that branch. The only other one is clearly we are working through with Auckland Transport to say, well, is the level of disruption going to be acceptable? Do we have to drag some of these projects out to ensure that we get a better balance between ability to provide service and disrupt? But at the present moment, we're on track to complete before.
Okay, thank you. I'm just on the Eastern Line, which is in my area. How confident are you that the measures you are taking will restore the Eastern Line program to plan?
I'll lead off. I'd say I'd put myself at 100%.
Okay, now, and the last issue I want to cover is the arcing issue, because obviously this was one that, you know, took the whole network down. So I've got a couple of things there on this. Now that you know that this can be dealt with at the end of service, would you have handled this differently?
I'll answer first, John, if you like. We know that one could have been handled at the end of service because we turned off the power and got close to it. We couldn't know whether, let's just say it happened tomorrow, we couldn't know, just sitting and look at it, whether it could be resolved without turning off the power.
Okay, and I get that
So
safety
that's
was the
wisdom.
issue, yeah.
That is wisdom after the event on inspection. I couldn't say tomorrow that if it happened, we'd say, oh no, we could leave it, because just don't know. John, do you want to add anything to that?
No, I think that's enough.
I think that's handled, that's great for me, thank you. The next question though is, when I did speak to you about the arcing issue, because obviously it took everything down, I asked the question, and forgive me if it's simplistic, why did it have to take the whole network down, and why couldn't it have been isolated to where it was? And, you know, because everything went down.
Okay, let's just talk about the supply of power to the network. At the present moment, there's only 2 supplies of power to the Auckland network, which is Penrose and Westfield. So it's coming into the centre and feeding out. As part of the rail network rebuild, if I went back a couple of slides, you'd see Western Power Feed. Once that is in, then we could have dealt with this by closing off one of the central power feeds and feeding backwards. We've also got the power feed going in at the south, which will feed in. So at the moment, everything's in the centre going out, which gives a vulnerability. When we've completed the rebuild, we'll have 4 power feeds, and they can subdivide the network much more easily. But at the moment, our hands are right up our back.
Okay, thank you. And finally, sorry for all this, but now we know it rains a lot, like, you know, a lot. And when it rains over the tracks, you've got to stop the train tracks. So when in this rebuild, do you have any idea about how many millimetres of rain can fall before you have to shut down the train tracks? Have you got the resilience? I know this. I'm learning a lot about millimetres of rainfall at the moment, so I'm just really keen that resilience is built into this rebuild, so if we've got X number of millimetres, the tracks are still high enough.
No, Councillor, you're absolutely right, and that's something around our diagnostics and review process. We're looking at how we work models to assess our asset condition versus the weather events, because they are frequent, and how can we work up models. So that's part of some of the design thinking we're having to do around resilience and building in those extreme weather events into our maintenance, preventative maintenance plan, and also our funding.
Sorry, so just to hone in on that, so you're saying that there isn't resilience in the rebuild now, or that will only be in the maintenance?
No, there's resilience in the rebuild. I think the core things we're doing is, one is the formation, and second, the drainage. Water is the enemy of any transport network. So a big chunk of our expenditure is based on getting the drainage done properly, so you can get the water away from the ballast to do that. There will be some areas, and Councillor Turvey just raised something during the break about a sizing of culverts. We'll be looking at things like that to make sure, one, that the network can take it, and two, the network doesn't become the barrier to water flow for adjoining lands.
That's great, thank you, Chair.
Okay, Councillor Ferry.
Thanks. Just point out, water's not the enemy for the ferries, but I had 2 questions. One's around the mobility issues, which I've raised before around the rail network rebuild. And are we, now we're in stage 2, obviously replacing trains with buses creates some issues for some users, particularly the disability sector and those accessing for bicycles. Have we, now that we're into stage 2, have we had some conversations with those sectors Are we engaging with them? Are we working out, how is this working for you? Could we do better? And then I've got one other, thanks.
In all honesty, I can't answer that as well as hopefully my colleagues at AT could, because they are the ones doing the thing.
Okay, thanks.
Sorry, Mark. We're just...
No, that's right. I'll redirect it to them. I have in the past had AT tell me I need to talk to you, so that's fine. Also, at an early stage, and I really appreciate this, by the way, it's really great opportunity. At an earlier point, you mentioned that there were some possibilities with what you were learning as you do the rail network rebuild, that you might actually be able to do some of the work in the future faster. So how's that going? I'm not obviously, you're only at stage 2, but are we finding, are we learning some stuff that means that we might be able to speed up the later stages yet?
In terms of specifics, Councillor, I can't talk to that, but I do know that our project director of R&R is taking the lessons learned around efficiencies and new ways of working into subsequent stages, and where we can implement those learnings, we'll look at trying to save time to complete faster, and that's part of the challenge that our rail partners at AT and AOR have given us, and some of that work is being progressively done.
Maybe I'll be a bit more specific than that. Certainly learned how much resource we can put on any given area before you actually start to get inefficiencies. I've also asked the program director to respond to me saying if the whole world revolved around your project, what resource would you bring to bear that could make it more efficient? We are talking to both our contractors, both of them who have ideas, but the challenge and where we are is there's not too many access points. Where they're really focusing in on is the access points for future blocks. Because once you've got someone there, you're blocked, you can't go past. But absolutely, we're onto that. And and Auckland Transport are being very direct in their feedback to us that we need to try and find ways to speed it up.
Right, and I wonder if that might be something to go into more detail on in a future presentation when you're further down the track, as it were.
Happy to do so.
Yeah, happy to do that, Councillor.
Yeah. Can I you mentioned AOR, so obviously this has quite a lot of implications for the workers employed by AOR. How is that conversation going? Because obviously I mentioned there's a bit of chop and change at their end.
Councillor, I think the relationship's very strong actually in terms of timetable planning, disruption management and extreme weather management. Our train control and NCM manage those incidents because they control the network and the pathways for both passenger and freight. But the priority is obviously our passengers with respect to customers, and at the operational level and at the lower level, the tactical level I'll call it, those relationships are very strong, and equally strong at the strategic level between the Chief Executive and Dave and Siva within KiwiRail. So those relationships are strong and the processes are really starting to develop. So I've got confidence in that relationship.
Also make the point, this time in a year, Auckland Transport's operations, KiwiRail's operations and Auckland One Rail's operations will be in the Common Control Centre in Ellerslie. So another sort of building block in bringing the resilience up.
Thank you.
Right, a few more questions coming up from Councillor Filipina, Walker, Councillor Lee and Councillor Turner.
Thank you, Chair. Tēnā kōrua, gentlemen. Look, one question is on the OLE arcing, and on the what happened PowerPoint page, you said that it was caused by contamination, build-up and moisture, and then you had can include. What were the contaminants that were found in there? Because it doesn't tell us. You only put in there can include. What were they?
Councillor, it was moisture. Yeah, it was moisture that caused the arcing.
Okay, and that was the only one?
That was the only area that we found.
Of course, yeah.
Correct.
Okay, and look, this question may be outside of this particular presentation, but I'll ask it anyway, Chair, and it's got to do with the track evaluation car. Now, I spoke to the KiwiRail guru on my left, and apparently we've already had that track evaluation. We've done that. When is the next stage, and what is the infrastructure? Are we up to date with the infrastructure that had caused the issues in Wellington, Kilda?
Yeah, Councillor, kia ora. The answer to that is yes, we are up to code, and yes, the track evaluation car is serviceable, and it runs on a 4-monthly interval, and it's registered and will visit according to our code.
Chair, just one more something very quickly. And is it likely the track evaluation car store to be replaced 26, 27? Is that store, or has that been brought forward as a result of the Wellington issues? Thank you, Chair.
It hasn't been brought forward as a result. What I can say is I'm going to the board on next week with a recommendation about a supplier. That process had been in play for the previous 8 months. So they won't build it any faster for us than for anyone else.
Very timely question. Councillor Walker?
Yeah, a few questions. The first two might be just yeses. Are we going to have no disruptions for FIFA coming up? So that's the first question. The second question goes back to that slide you had where you showed the network, and included within that, I think there was a yellow that showed the Avondale to Southdown line, and last time you mentioned you were working on that. Are we going to have some figures on that sometime soon? Again, that could be a yes. And the last question I've got just goes further to the one that Desley Simpson raised around integrity of the network. So have you considered, for example, the provision of things like Tesla megapacks or the like within the network that would enable you to isolate parts of the network, so you've got an absence of so much redundancy if you have to shut the whole thing down? If the business case showed that you could buy the power off peak and then use it at peak, you'd save money, so it might be cost neutral, and it would generate resilience. Are you working on that kind of facility?
Yeah, FIFA, I'll start with, Councillor. I'm confident there'll be no disruptions.
Okay, great.
And with respect to the other question was traction. Sorry,
The other question was just
the Tesla power.
I can take the traction question. Our first priority is to get the conventional feeds there. Then you've got to do the overlap of that with other alternative sources, or do you put another set of feeds in? The bigger or the more tactical approach is to keep subdividing the network into smaller and smaller sections, which is, again, at the moment it's set out with broader sections. You can subdivide it, but every subdivision brings a degree of weakness into the system as well. It's another chain. So yes, we're looking at that. I don't know whether my technical people are looking at power packs or not. I just can't answer that at the moment. So, Wayne, sorry.
Okay, thanks for those answers. Councillor Lee?
Thank you, gentlemen. I've had a concern raised by a local resident in Onehonga that the Kiwi Rail, New Zealand Rail crossover at Te Papapa, which enabled trains to theoretically cross over, has been, the points have been removed. Will that facility be repaired as part of the rebuild, or?
Councillor, I'm not over that actual piece of detail, but I can report back. I just don't have that answer.
The benefit is just adds flexibility to a line that has some constraints, as we often hear. Okay, in terms of the rail network rebuild, have you got an end? The question of Newmarket came up at the last presentation, and rather than it being done by the all-important day one, as they call it, for the CRL, it's going to be left till later, so there'll be some disruption then. But that day one, in terms of completion and operation date, keeps going backwards. So what sort of date are you guys working on right now for the CRL, so-called day one?
Well, there's 2 day ones, but I'm trying to progress it so everything is completed by 2025. Look, I don't know whether we'll put Newmarket behind or not. At the moment, I'm simply raising it as a possibility.
Okay, can I make some helpful suggestions? In your presentations, which are always extremely interesting for us, there's a lot of acronyms that, well, me for one, and a lot of members of the public won't understand so easily, like OLE, NAL, RNR, TSR, H4O, EM8C, FY, and there's even a FIFA, WWSC, which doesn't relate to rail techo jargon. But
That's FIFA World Cup.
yeah, I know that one. But so it might be helpful to put a few full words in there for when you're dealing with the public.
Thank you, Councillor.
The other bit of advice or suggestion, and I don't know how accurate this will be for the situation, but you've got, we had a real serious problem with the arcing incident, and you say that your inspections and monitoring is within code, but yet still we had the arcing incident. Back in the old days, the New Zealand Post Office used to carry out a free TV interference service, and one of the main causes of VHF TV interference was arcing power insulators. So I just wonder whether using radio monitoring, wideband radio monitoring, that may give you an early warning if an insulator is arcing, because as you say, to carry out a real close visual inspection, you have to shut the whole network down. But a remote radio monitoring may actually give you an indication if there's static going across, localised static being caused by those discharges. Anyway, I'll leave it at that. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Councillor. Look, I'll raise, that one's well outside my competence. I'll raise it with the appropriate technical people, but thank you.
Yep, thanks for those suggestions, Councillor Lee. Councillor Turner and finally Councillor Fletcher.
Thank you. Just that subject we did raise in the break has gone on for ages, and the people who are affected have got multiple times when they've been told there's a conflict between council and Kiwi Rail and stuff like that, just with procedure. All I'm asking is if there's any sort of council input into these decision makings. Could you identify them and tell us so that we can improve them and make it all work better?
Yeah, look, Councillor, I'll take that personally in this meeting to go and speak with you on the situation. I'm just unaware of those reports. So I'll at the end of this meeting I'll sit with you and then we'll rectify that. I'll do that in person.
Thank you. My main point is just that we're in this too sometimes with consenting, etc., and we need to pull our finger out and speed this stuff up.
You look, it's very important we get a central message and understand, so we need to come to our customers and people and get it right.
Thank you, gentlemen. I look forward always to the presentations that you make for the clarity that they bring. In addition to the matters of accountability that you've raised that will occur within Kiwi Rail on network health and resilience, are there other wider matters, and are there matters that we as a council can be advocating to central government on your behalf, such as the overall power supply, looking out into the future, these sorts of things? Because it would be good to think that that partnership between the council and Kiwi Rail can be a strong one, and I'd like to feel that we have a fantastic lead officer in Barry Potter. The Mayor is a champion on these sorts of things. Are there specific points of advocacy that we might be making?
It's an interesting question to ask when you're responsible to the Crown, as we are. So I'll pick my way carefully through an answer here. I think one of the huge challenges we're going to face, and the city's going to face, is the ability to get enough power into the central Auckland for an electric future. And it's not just going to be us that's with that problem. That's something to be done. And the other issue is the overall metro model in terms of funding. I've made very clear that what is necessary and what is likely to be affordable for both regional councils, there is a gap between it. That's being looked at as part of ATAP. For the rest of it, it's clearly any policies that help move volume from rail, help us from road to rail, would be helpful. I think what's really interesting coming out in the business cases that we're doing is that the shift of freight to rail, even in the urban area, is having a better carbon impact than the shift of people from cars to transport. And it's not that well understood that you're actually getting your benefits there and the consequential benefits, as opposed to saying move everyone from their cars to the train. It helps, but not as much as moving the freight to the thing.
I think that's very interesting, and I don't wish to cause any awkwardness to you in sitting here,
But
bearing in mind the Crown. But I am interested, as someone who likes to think about the future, in that capacity issue with regards power supply, and I don't fully understand the implications at the moment. We can do our level best to create an environment where people are moving into public transport and freight moving on to rail, but it's in understanding all of the pieces of the jigsaw that will work effectively into the future.
well, to me, the power one is the most interesting. If, taking a long-term view, the Upper North Island is electrified, there'll be a series of freight trains running through Auckland, wanting to use the same power that the metro trains are using. So we will need more power to do that. Why I'm very pleased the way Drury is going is it really works well for Transpower as well. But I can conceive of a situation, and I'm sure Transpower are well and truly across this, that the amount of power having to come into Auckland, how do you get it in, really, and what do the lines look like? Do you have to string a whole lot more wire through Auckland? Is it underground, which is, I think, sort of tenfold more expensive? These are big issues, well beyond Kiwi Rail, but they are, to me, vital urban development.
But they're relevant
issues.
to an infrastructure committee.
I was going to say they're very relevant to an infrastructure focus, just a lot bigger than rail. Yeah.
And Mr. Chair, I think that's something that we do have to advocate for and consider for the future.
I'm sure Barry Potter's made a note of that in his little blue book there. Look, I think we've had the questions. Dave and John, I'd just really like to reiterate the views expressed by a number of councillors as to the appreciation for front-footing the issue for a start, but also the value we're getting out of these briefings on the rail. There's a lot of interest around the table, and we certainly appreciate getting updated and the more optimistic outlook that appears to be developing over the medium term. So, ladies and gentlemen, is there? Councillor Simpson is happy to move it. Councillor Walker was seconded. I don't think there's anyone wanting to speak to it, so I'll just put it to the vote. All those in favour? Aye. Against? So carried. Now I'm in your hands a bit here, councillors. I think it probably would be an opportune time just to have a bit of a break now. Tempted to rush through the northwestern update, but I'm getting a steely glare from Councillor Henderson, who will want it given its due attention, and to be honest, I feel the same way myself. So I think we'll have that after lunch. It's coming up for 5 to 1 now, so we'll come back at 25 past. I understand there's a few sandwiches available outside for anyone that's just keen to get something to eat here. So we will resume at 25 past 1, and we'll have Steve Mutton and Randir letting us off there on the update in the Northwestern Busway. Thank you.